Stop everything. Because what investigators quietly confirmed just hours ago is something almost nobody expected. And if this update is accurate, then the entire timeline of the disappearance of Lilly and Jack Sullivan may be wrong, and that changes everything. This can't be true, but let's get into it. Before today's development, here's what we knew, and now we can lay it out with much more depth and clarity. On May 2nd, siblings Lilly and Jack were reported missing from their home in rural Nova Scotia. That moment triggered what quickly became one of the most intense and wide-reaching searches the province has seen in years. Within hours, emergency crews, specialized RCMP units, volunteer teams, and local residents were combing through the dense wooded areas surrounding the family's property. These weren't casual sweeps. They were structured, methodical searches carried out by professionals who knew exactly what signs to look for. The terrain itself made things difficult. Thick underbrush, steep areas, scattered water sources, and long, unmarked trails meant every step had to be deliberate. Police brought in drones equipped with heat mapping capabilities, aerial teams to cover large distances, and underwater units to check ponds, creeks, and any water structure that could possibly hold clues. At the same time, investigators were coordinating polygraph examinations, reviewing hours of surveillance footage from surrounding roads and businesses, and cross-checking timelines provided by multiple witnesses. By this point, authorities had interviewed more than 50 people. Neighbors, relatives, community members, and anyone who might have seen or heard something even slightly out of the ordinary. They followed hundreds of public tips, some substantial and some vague, but every single one was logged, sorted, and chased down. Digital forensics teams sifted through devices and communication records. Ground crews searched wells, sheds, outbuildings, and miles of forest pathways. And analysts studied more than 480 pieces of submitted information, from video clips to maps to reported observations. And yet, despite the size of the operation and the sheer amount of data processed, there has not been a single confirmed trace of Lilly or Jack. Not an item, not a verified sighting, not a piece of physical evidence that definitively explains what happened. That silence has been the most unsettling part of this entire case. But what came out today may finally explain why. Just now, investigators revealed they're re-examining the very first hour of the disappearance, and expanding this makes it clear just how significant that shift truly is. When major crime units decide to return to the very beginning of a case, it's rarely routine. It usually means they found a detail, a contradiction, or an inconsistency that only becomes obvious when the earliest moments are placed under a microscope. And according to investigators, that is exactly what's happening now. They are re-evaluating the exact time the children were last seen inside the home, not just a general estimate previously provided, but the minute-by-minute window that includes when each adult claims they checked on the kids, when the house was quiet, what was happening in each room, and whether any noise, movement, or interaction during that hour lines up with later statements. That first hour is where timelines are born, and if the timeline is even slightly off, the entire structure of the investigation shifts. Another key focus is which exits could realistically be used by two children that young. Investigators are looking at door heights, locks, latches, alarms, the layout of the home, and even the physical reach and ability of a 4- and 6-year-old. They are reconstructing what the children could have done on their own versus what would require an adult's involvement. This isn't speculation. It's precise reconstruction. They're testing whether the pathways originally described are physically possible. And then there's a third piece, whether the initial sightings match the actual timeline. Police are going back through statements, comparing timestamps, checking whether surveillance footage aligns with what was said, and verify if any reported sighting occurred earlier or later than first believed. Small shifts, even a few minutes, can completely change what is believed to have happened. One investigator familiar with the review called this shift a sign that the answer is closer than anyone thought. A statement like that doesn't surface casually. It suggests investigators believe something in those early moments contains a clue that was either overlooked or misunderstood. And there's something even stranger. Investigators are also taking a fresh, deeper look at a witness report that many people assumed had been dismissed months ago. But now, it's suddenly back at the center of attention. Expanding this fully reveals why it's becoming such a crucial piece of the puzzle. According to this witness, She saw something that, at the time, felt unusual but not urgent. A young girl and a young boy, holding hands, walking toward a parked sedan on a quiet stretch of road. Standing next to that sedan, she recalled, was an older woman, positioned in a way that suggested she was waiting for the children or guiding them toward the vehicle. At first glance, nothing about this seemed alarming. Plenty of families walk that way, and plenty of relatives pick up kids. But the moment investigators began reconstructing the timeline, this report took on an entirely new weight. The ages of the children she described didn't match perfectly with Lilly and Jack. The clothing wasn't an exact match either. Slightly different colors, slightly different details. That alone was enough for many people to assume the sighting couldn't be connected. For months, it was pushed aside by the public and treated as a coincidence rather than a lead. But here's the part that has investigators looking again. The direction and timing she described fall directly into the same window when Lilly and Jack disappeared. In rural areas where people recognize familiar faces, an unexpected pair of children walking with someone they don't usually interact with stands out. And the fact that the route she described leads away from the Sullivan property and toward a road with multiple exit points makes the sighting even harder to ignore. Now, investigators are re-examining the woman's statement with tools they didn't have at the beginning: digital data, time-stamped phone pings, enhanced surveillance review, and refined movement analysis. They are checking whether any nearby vehicles match the sedan she described, whether any unfamiliar cars were on that road during the relevant time frame, and whether any digital activity overlaps with her account. A report that once seemed too imperfect to matter is suddenly being treated as potentially significant. And this brings us to the most confusing part yet. One of the strangest, most consistently debated parts of this entire case has always been the location itself. And expanding this reveals just how baffling the setting truly is. The woods surrounding the Sullivan home are not the kind of woods you stroll into by accident. They are dense, layered with thick underbrush, tangled branches, and uneven natural obstacles that even trained adults struggle to move through without slowing down. Search teams who worked the area described the landscape as almost impassable, emphasizing that every step requires pushing aside branches, climbing over fallen trees, or maneuvering through deep brush that grabs onto clothing and gear. These woods are also full of fallen trees, some of them large enough that they act as barriers, forming natural walls across narrow trails or blocking direct passage. For young children, especially a 4-year-old, these aren't minor obstacles. They are physical barriers that would slow them to a crawl or stop them completely. Even the most adventurous child would find it extremely difficult to travel more than a short distance without slipping, tripping, or getting turned around. They are hard to move through, even for experienced ground search teams. Crews reported needing to use marked grid patterns, physical markers, GPS devices, and coordinated sweeps just to ensure no small area was overlooked. Adults wearing heavy-duty boots and protective gear took hours to cover short distances because the terrain is that challenging. And because of that, it is considered nearly impossible for young children to navigate alone. Kids that age simply don't have the strength, height, or awareness to make it far into terrain that demanding. If they had entered the woods, searchers would have expected to find at minimum small indicators: disturbed brush, broken twigs, a visible path through soft ground, or even scent trails picked up by the K9 units. Yet there is still zero evidence suggesting the children ever went into that forest. No clothing, no confirmed footprints, no scent trails tracked by dogs, no physical disturbance pointing to their movements. Nothing. This contradiction, difficult terrain that should leave obvious signs, contrasted with a total absence of evidence, is one of the main reasons investigators now believe something critical is missing from the earliest part of the timeline. If the environment doesn't support the original assumptions, then the assumptions need to be re-examined. And that's exactly what they're doing. So why is today's update so important? Expanding this makes the shift in the investigation much clearer and much more significant. For months, the search for Lilly and Jack felt like it was running in circles. Teams combed through woods, collected surveillance footage, followed every lead, and re-interviewed everyone connected to the case. Yet the core question remained completely unanswered. Not because investigators weren't working, but because the information they had simply didn't line up cleanly. Now, with today's update, it's clear the RCMP is no longer treating those early gaps as background noise. They are treating them as the key.